Hello. Oh, yes. Um, cool, Brian. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for taking the time. I see Salix and I see some friends here, so thanks for showing up. I thought I've sort of given similar presentations many times, which sort of online and in papers, and I thought instead of talking at y'all, I would just sort of informally just give a web of what's going on in my head right now related to dreams and what sort of projects are live. And then I'm hoping we can spend most of the time talking to each other just because it's more fun. And I think the sort of useful bit of info just to start out with is I'm much less focused than Brian on the sort of lucid dreaming space. I'm really interested in something which sounds similar, but I think is decently different, which is the idea of dream incubation. So less interested in the question of lucidity. Do I know that what I'm in is a dream while I'm in it? And the kind of ripple effects of lucidity. More interested in what if I could choose content to dream about? Whether I know it's a dream or not is less important to me. More whether I can incubate, sort of successfully place a topic into that dream, is what I've been focused on. And I originally got focused on that because lucid dreaming seemed like an amazing state to research lucid dreaming in. But since it's such a strange parasomnia, I thought, well, if we want to answer questions about sort of REM sleep pure, then we have to find a way to do controlled experiments on dreams without making this kind of mixed wake sleep state, because then people will just say, well, that's not really a dream, that's this other lucid dream thing. So how do you do this kind of paradoxical control enough to do a controlled experiment, but not necessarily change the kind of sleep state you're in? So the sort of short and sweet version of what we did is there had been a series of studies out of Robert Stickgold's lab, mostly on these Tetris dreaming studies, where basically he had people play 6 hours of Tetris for multiple days, and not that surprising probably to all of you, those people dreamed about Tetris, especially in their sleep onset period. And I said, oh, wow, that's exciting. There's some degree to which you can control dream content. And then thought, well, instead of making them do something while they're awake, what if we tried to deliver some stimuli while they were half asleep in the kind of hypnagogic period or sleep onset period or the early hoary stages or N1, whatever you want to call it. The sort of, it's basically drowsiness. It's when you're a little bit different. So we would let people slip into sleep. When they're half asleep, play some sounds. They would fall further into sleep, have a dream. We would wake them up for a dream report, and then we would repeat. And sort of over an hour, they would maybe have 5 dreams. And we hover now, after a series of studies, at like 92% efficacy about, which means if we bring in 100 subjects, we expect 92 of them over the course of an hour to have one dream about the topic that we choose. A dream about a tree, a dream about a dog. And that doesn't mean we control the whole dream, of course. It's not, oh, it's this particular tree on this particular lawn and you're doing this particular action at this particular time. It's so nice because it's like more like planting a seed. It's like, oh, what does a tree become for you? It's this memory for you. It's this tree for you. A tree for me is a happy childhood. I'm climbing with my brother. A tree for you is when there was that lightning storm and it's so scary, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very light degree of control, which is why I like the word incubation, the kind of cubare, cubicle, egg, Latin roots, kind of laying a little chicken and seeing where it goes. And yeah, so we had this bit of technology, which Brian showed, which is this glove, which sits on the hand, and we called it the dormio, and it tracks some pretty simple biosignals. It's looking at heart rate and looking at muscle flexion, changes in muscle tone as you fall into sleep, and looking at little changes in a galvanic skin response, like the affectiva or sort of some other sleep staging devices you might have seen. It's called the Empatica. Affectiva is the company. When we find somebody in that half asleep state, This device, which is tracking, also can talk. It can also ask for a dream report. It can record. And then after your hour, you kind of have been audio cued, woken up for a report, spoken, recorded, audio cued, woken up for a report, spoken, and then we give you all those audio recordings at the end. And so you can, just in case after the fourth or fifth time of dropping into N1 or N2, you forgot what you were dreaming about, you have all these audio recordings. And so sort of the condensed version is, oh, it seems like we can do a good job controlling dream content, at least in this really easy initial period of sleep. That's cool because you can mess around in naps. So you don't need to mess with anybody's sleep architecture for overnights. It's cool because dream recall is really, really high in N1. So we're in the 90s. We're not getting a lot of white dreams, or we're not getting a lot of people, oh, I was something, but I can't get it. And it's cool because N1 is really close to wake phenomenologically, physiologically. And so your success rate's just quite high compared to people who are trying to, for instance, try to do some exposure to stimuli at sleep onset and then wait for REM reports 4 hours later, where things don't go that well if you're looking for incubation. Except some recent research from Aaron Walmsley and folks suggests that maybe those dreams that are incubated at sleep onset actually keep popping up in more and more abstracted forms throughout the night in other sleep stages. And yeah, all of this for me is exciting. Probably a lot of y'all on the call know just as much as I do about this. It's exciting because we have all this kind of correlational information about what dreams do. Oh, we have Roz Cartwright's research saying that dreams correlate with depression or PTSD outcomes. And we have Mike Nadorf saying dreams correlate with suicidality. And then we have the recent research showing that sleep onset dreams sleep onset period is implicated in creative output. Or we have people dream in a language, they do better in a foreign language learning course. But we don't have any causal studies until really, I think, recently they're popping up, just the first few, where instead of just correlational studies, we're intervening in sleep and intervening in dreams and saying, well, we could not just say, well, maybe there's a link between foreign language. What if we made someone dream in Spanish in a Spanish language learning course, and then we showed, oh, it turns outcomes, and then it turns out we think about education on a 24-hour spectrum, not just the hour you're sitting in class, but all the offline kind of cognition, where we're taking explicit things and making them implicit, kind of offline cognition, where we're practicing. And I think the implications of it are huge for memory and learning and creativity. And really memory evolution is kind of how I think of things rather than consolidation. The way our experiences become us overnight. And what we can do, and I think we'll get into this hopefully, that strikes some people as kind of creepy. The idea that you would use tech to change what people are dreaming about. And the sort of obvious point, which I like to make, is we spend all day trying to make ourselves think of certain things. Oh, I'm going to focus on this lecture. Someone's going to text me this thing to make me think about this particular thing, whatever it is. We spend all day trying to control our thoughts and direct them for certain outcomes, be those creativity, productivity, community. And then we just let our dreams happen to us, even though we know they're really crucially important. We just sort of say, whatever comes, comes, even if whatever comes is really negative, unproductive, contributes to some really difficult cycles. Like I'm doing, I'll talk for like 3 more minutes and I'll shut up, but I'm doing right now a lot of nightmare work. And so working with these kind of repetitive nightmares that folks can experience. And it's really interesting. And I'm also, I think I'll just do a quick little summary. I'm doing some nightmare work with people who have combat exposure. And that looks like taking imagery rehearsal therapy protocols, which are meant to have people take a nightmare that they have every night and change a little bit of it during the day. Oh, they're chasing me down the hall with the knife, but then I grow wings, or then they turn purple and run away, whatever. And then rehearsing that changed dream so many times that it becomes easier for your brain, once it starts down that path of a nightmare, to follow this new, not so scary path. And we're sort of taking that IRT protocol and giving people the opportunity to do it in hypnagogia rather than in non-REM 3 or in REM, so that it's much easier to get a sort of successful incubated dream, and then people can hopefully gain some kind of confidence in relation to the longer therapeutic process they'll gain by having a kind of concrete experience of successful incubation. So I'm doing a lot of, if that wasn't clear, please ask me what I mean. But I'm doing so some nightwear work, and then I'm doing something much less serious, which is kind of ridiculous. But I just spent 3 weeks in Switzerland at a museum building a bed, which, if there's some sort of engineering minds on here, you might like. It's a hexapod. It's a 6-leg bed, and it has some sleep tracking, crude, and it looks for sleep onset, and it rocks people to sleep in this kind of circular, funky way. And then it waits and it looks for REM, and it rocks them much more intensely, and it starts talking to them. And it uses a little bit of targeted dream incubation, which is my stuff, and a little bit of who knows what, moving people while they're in REM. And it is meant to make them have flying dreams. And this is a little bit stolen from Tori Nielsen's work on incubating flying dreams using VR, which Tech for Dreaming folks would probably enjoy. It's a little bit stolen from Tori's earlier work on somatosensory stimulation and kinesthetic stim in sleep to make people have dreams of things like a handshake by shocking their muscles or putting pressure cuffs on their arms or legs. And so we built a bed, and it is in a museum, and people come and sleep overnight, and it rocks them to sleep and then gives them strange motions in REM and talks to them. And we hope that in the morning they have flying dreams. And only a few people have slept on it, but we have gotten 2 flying dream reports, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, I'm doing some nightmare stuff. I'm doing some silly flying dream stuff. And then we're taking our Dormio sort of targeted dream incubation at sleep onset device and trying to make it a lot simpler. So we just published a paper with some folks from Duke, which shows that we can maybe get dream incubation at the same rates of success just by using a set of timers. We ask people how long it takes them to get to sleep. We bump some extra minutes onto that estimate. We play the same sort of audio, remember to think of a tree. We ask for the same sort of dream reports, tell me what you're thinking about, but we do it all from a Chrome web browser with no sensors on their body. And we just did it on 80 people, and it seems to work pretty well in terms of getting incubated dreams just by playing audio cues at the right time. And yeah, so I think the things I'm really excited about talking about would be the therapeutic or learning related or entertainment related uses of successful dream incubation, and the kind of relative advantages of N1 or sleep onset versus later stage stuff, the kind of why people are stoked about lucidity and how incubation strikes you. And then there's a whole path which I think is probably useful for folks in your world who have an understanding of the technology side of things and how quickly tools can spin out of control. There was also a whole saga where, when I can jump into this if we want, but just depending on what the sort of first questions are, where Coors Beer used my master's or PhD stuff, and had a lot of people in the Super Bowl have dreams about Coors Beer, so they would wake up and drink more. The sort of short version is I said, please don't do that. And they got a Harvard professor to design this incubation for them instead. And then they had like the singer from One Direction, Zayn Malik, promoted on his Instagram Live while he slept and had a dream about Coors Beer. And it like really got out of hand. And then we had a whole fight, and then it got to the floor of the FTC, and this nice law review article written about it, all kinds of questions. But so there's the ethical dimension, both, I think, broad, who are you to mess with people's dreams, and then specific, does this count as subliminal advertising? And if so, how can you limit use cases that are negative while still supporting ones that are positive? And yeah, so I don't know. I got some nightmare stuff. I got some art stuff. If you sleeping art, I got some device stuff moving away from hardware and away from sensors. I got some N1 broad kind of curiosities, and And yeah, and then yeah, I think that's enough for now, probably. And I can keep going if people want, but maybe something strikes folks as
There's
interesting line to pull.
there's a no shortage of topics or different like pathways to go down here, like between the different projects you mentioned, between the privacy concerns. Um, and I think if people have questions, there's a few different ways you could ask the questions. You could either drop them in the chat, or you can just raise your hand with the Zoom function, like whatever you're comfortable with, is fine. And
That's raising a hand, it looks like.
oh, nice. And we got a raised hand already. So I was gonna start with a generic question about how did you get into dream incubation, but like that, like let's go over to the person with the raised hand because I want, like I'm gonna defer to like all the attendees here that showed up to ask the questions, and let's go see where the conversation flows. All right, go for it.
Right on. Hey, Adam, good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Texting you that
Well, yeah. First, I'm curious what the museum is in Switzerland.
it's called the Beiler Foundation. And it's in Basel, Switzerland, like Beyler. And I did it in collaboration with an artist named Karsten Holler, who
Uh-huh.
um often he makes these big slides and upside down mushrooms, and he's kind of a funky thinker, but he was doing some beds which roamed around museums and was interested in sleep and dreams, and I don't know how he found me, but turned into a fun project. Yeah, so that's where
Yeah. Do you think you'll like share out the sort of, results from that, or is it more about being a museum experience for folks there?
so I think that's a really fun question. I want to write. There's a journal called Leonardo. Oh yeah, thanks. Somebody just found it in the chat. There's a journal called Leonardo, which is around MIT a lot. It might even be an MIT journal, but it's a really great art science journal. And so I'm hoping to collect a lot of dream reports from people and do a paper for them. And then it was an interesting conversation. This is a whole different kind of conversation, but some of the curators there and this artist said, you don't ask people about their art experiences. You don't make them articulate it. Like there's something that happens here which isn't necessarily something you can put into words, and that's that special thing. Why art? That's why we're not writing prose. And so don't make them tell you about their experience. Let them experience it and leave. And so I said, oh gosh, yeah, so I don't know. So there's an option basically. People can, if they want to, wake up in the morning, call a phone line, and leave on an answering machine a dream report if they want to.
So cool. Yeah. And then just one hopefully semi quick follow up, just on the last point you were talking about, I'm always kind of curious about this ethics question, and just like, do you feel like there's any more sort of like up to date sense that you have on the, all of that based on how tech is advancing or any of these products are?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most sort of I was really surprised. I don't know if y'all saw sort of the New York Times, the Netflix CEO, um, maybe yesterday saying his sort of goal is to make more binge watching, and then earlier saying his main competitor is sleep. Um, I think that the sort of binge watching entertainment effect on dreams, plus the like collaborations between like Endel, this music gen software a lot of people are falling asleep to, with like Grimes, and allowing commercial artists, and like they made a or like Muse, these headbands, or Headspace doing a collaboration with Dune. I think that the sort of the ways that commercial interests are sneaking into sleep is going to be extremely subtle, and so it worries me that now do really effective sleep staging. I don't know. There's a Nature paper pretty recently about sleep staging using just speakers like an Amazon Echo sitting in the bedroom, and it's like gosh, it's such a large portion of America that moved those from their living room into their bedrooms and use them as their alarm and use them to play thunderstorms at night. So like all the all the tech is there, and I don't particularly think people care enough to defend themselves. And I think that this might be a little bit too much patting ourselves on our own backs, but I think that we slowed things down a little bit by gathering a bunch of scientists and policymakers and saying you can't do this, and getting a lot of negative press around it when there was none, and that's because there's this big report. I forget the name, but I have it, which is like a top trends advertising report, and my stepmom happens to be in advertising, and said, oh, this is the thing that everybody looks at, and trend number 37 was like dream advertising, and then it said, oh, it's really effective, da 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 da, because Coors had their biggest market share in their history after doing this Super Bowl ad, by the way. Oh, it's really effective, but it seems to raise a stink, especially among scientific community. We'd recommend not doing it. So I say, oh, maybe it's slowing down. I have no idea. The law review article by Dustin Marlin that just came out about it is really good, and I think necessary, because there's a lot of intricacies which I do not understand, about the FTC not being a body that puts out laws, but being a body that puts out something else, recommendations, policies, something else. It's like an advisory regulatory body, and it seems basically like they have to put out specifically a memo saying that all their litigation around subliminal advertising applies specifically to dream advertising, like they did earlier with the kind of famous radio subliminal advertising spots. All that to say, I don't know. Seems like it slowed down a bit. Hope it stays slowed down. And I get fewer calls now than I used to participate in ad campaigns. But that's probably because I've just ruined my career opportunities. So maybe that's that. Yeah.
Way to go.
All right, nice. I see a few questions in the chat. First one I see is from Dash. Are you able to unmute and ask it, or do you want me to just ask it for you?
Yeah, I can ask it. So I see you do a lot of stuff with N1, and I noticed that everyone's trying to get more deep sleep and more REM. And I've been very curious about if there's benefits to N1 and N2 and light sleep in general that we overlook. And I thought maybe you might have thoughts on that because of your research with like the Dormio.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is going to be experiential, cognitive, phenomenological, as opposed to I think when people talk about N3, they talk about recovery. When people talk about REM, they're talking about overnight therapy and the kind of affective regulation that happens there. I think that the recent paper, the Sleep Onset is a Creative Sweet Spot paper, I don't know if you saw that. There's a few papers which have just come out. I think that's the best one, but there's a lot from like folks like, if you look up Tristan Beckenstein's work or Tori Nielsen's work or Jenny Windt's work, or Delphine Wadet or Isabelle Arnulf, I think that one of the big benefits that N1 has is creativity. And I think that's because you can maintain a certain degree of metacognition while you're in N1. And so like there's a theory of creativity which I like a lot called the BVSR, which is the blind variation and selective retention theory. And so how do you get creative? Creativity is not about coming up with something new, at least new to you. Creativity is about blindly varying within your kind of semantic web of information. And then you're blindly varying because if you're surveying all the links that you're making, that kind of cognitive control is going to cut you off because you are going to only make solutions that are the kind of short distance semantic solutions that you come up with typically. Like, it's easiest for you to solve something in the same way you've solved it. And so you need to blindly vary amongst all your memories and semantic links, but you're watching and selectively retaining useful links. And so this is like, I'm in the shower and I'm sort of musing through things, and I'm thinking about chairs and thinking about dogs and thinking about chairs with dog paws. And then I say, whoa, hold on a second. Dog paw chairs. It's $1 million idea. Like it's this like blind variation in the shower, but you're still looking and you're selectively retaining. And N1 and hypnagogia are just extremely cognitively flexible, and they involve this massive spread, both semantically and in terms of memory networks. Like, Tori Nielsen wrote a paper about how typically in N1, in the first 5 minutes of sleep, memories will mix that are from 10 minutes and 10 years ago. There's this huge mixing that happens in N1. And because you're not fully asleep, you can be metacognitive enough to selectively retain things. And so this paper, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a 3x jump in Eureka solutions to problems, I think math problems, but they were creativity problems. If people spent just 15 seconds in N1, but if they went into N2, losing that creative benefit, that dipping your toes into this associative, hyper-flexible cognitive state boosts your creativity 3x. But if you go too deep, you lose all those solutions. So I think of N1, I think it does a lot of things. In terms of evidence, I think creativity is a great place to start. I also think it's just a doorway into sleep and a doorway into dreams, and that it's a much easier door to get your foot in with stimulation than later stages of sleep. And so I think there's ways, if you want to have a dream over the course of a night, which is, whatever, as silly as like I'm going to the movies and I want to continue having a Batman dream at night, or it's as serious as I'm going to work with my therapist and we're going to have dreams about a trauma or dreams about my mother. I think N1 is just going to be a really good bet for a doorway into sleep, again, because of this mix of dreamlike cognition with wake-like metacognitive abilities. If that's clear.
Nice.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks for asking.
I can't resist but ask a quick follow-up question too. We talked about sleep onset being a creative sweet spot. What about coming out of sleep in that, like N1? Do you think it's equal or comparable in like a creative sweet spot, or like differences?
Right. People name them. This is such a weirdly under-researched area. So people call it hypnagogia and hypnopomnia, right? Hypnagogic experience when you're going in, hypnopompic experience when you're coming out. Andreas Mavromatis wrote this thesis in the late 80s about hypnagogia, and that plus the Dan Schachter paper from a little bit after, I think, are the best sort of early sources, like solid gathering science. I have not read a good, if anybody has a good like lit review on hypnopomnia, send it to me. I have no idea. And I think that the reason I think it's really cool is because brain and cognitive sciences has such a long history of trying to understand function by looking at parts of the brain that are damaged. This is like Phineas Gage. This is like people with strokes in Broca's aphasia. This is like, a certain part of your brain had a problem, and you have a very specific problem in language. So we're going to think that part of the brain probably underlies some sort of language function. Great. But sleep onset is that every night. Like, it's you losing brain function as it passes across your head in these totally wild ways, and then also not gaining it back, right? So you have sleep inertia. After you wake somebody up from N1, it takes 20 minutes for them to gain back full frontal cerebral blood flow. And so you have like basically a brain damaged patient in the most interesting way, that but one who's about to come to full cognition and can report about that experience. It's like an amazing way to study the onset and outset of consciousness. And we just don't use it that much. And people say, oh man, like consciousness studies is like the hard problem in the brain sciences. Totally. But it's not an on-off problem. There's a problem of gradation, and that makes it totally tenable. Anyways, I don't know much about hypnopompic experiences because I haven't read much. But if there's more to read, it sounds like maybe Alex has something to read with a hand up there. Let me know. But yeah, I know very little about it. I think there's like a few, if you want to understand hypnagogia, I think you should read like Ogilvy's papers and Tristan Beckenstein's papers and Thomas Andrion's papers. If you want to read about hypnopomnia, I have no idea, which is dumb, but it's what I got.
Nice. Still good. And yeah, let's go over to Alex.
Yeah, I wish that I did have an actual paper. What I do have is a bunch of anecdotal experience, which I know is not the same thing, but I do regularly practice working with basically any thorny problem. I have a list of actually, you know, for when I come out of sleep in the morning, using that as a practice for problem solving. I make a lot of hardware projects, and that often comes with like, you know, how could I make this thing work, and like visualization and you know, and the creative side of like, how could I make it compelling, like to look at and stuff. And I do find that an incredibly fruitful way of doing it. And it's actually easier for me to do that than the hypnagogia, because hypnagogia, like maintaining that state and coming out of it, to me is like a very sort of tenuous balance to maintain. But then, you know, when you're waking up, you sort of every day you have this period of fruitfulness in the morning of like that flexible mental state. And you know that you're probably not going to fall back asleep again. So for me, that's actually been very, very useful.
Yeah.
But I don't have any papers on it.
It's also gonna be for many people more useful if you're looking for creativity or those kind of immersive dream experiences, because you're gonna be much more REM dense in that wake up in the alarm in the morning, go back silence, go back silence, go back silence, than if you're playing around with sleep onset, going to bed at 11 p.m., doing the same thing, awake silence, awake silence, awake silence. You're gonna be much more REM dense in the morning, just because of how your circadian rhythm works. And I mean, that's what everybody talks about when they talk about this creativity stuff, is silencing their alarm and having this crazy experience. And I'm glad that you said visuals. The reports from hypnagogia are not like often linguistic or semantic associations or like ideas. They're experiences of ideas. They're visual experiences of ideas. They're sound turning into vision. They're like totally synesthetic, and they're totally sensual. And so I think it's a really amazing, not just the kind of canvas that I have when I'm awake to think through a design problem or a poetry question or think about whatever. It's like just a totally 3D doesn't even sort of begin to describe the kind of canvas you have. So I think creativity is a great place to start. But then I'll say also just creativity is such a huge word. And I think, for instance, this nightmare work that I'm getting a chance to do, I think is creativity work. I think in many ways the problem with a repeated memory and a repeated nightmare is that it doesn't have a new way to be integrated into a network, a lifetime of sense making, and that you have to look back at an event in a kind of creative way to take a new perspective on it. And that same question of cognitive flexibility has some applications, I think, in a trauma realm as well as a kind of work productivity realm. Jacob, you had a hand up though. Oh, I can't hear.
Yeah, sorry, I was just searching. Couple. So we're seeing a bunch of folks grow older that have sort of like carried the torch from, you know, Jay, he just passed away. He was the guy at Harvard that worked with Stickold for a long time, right? And Stickold himself is getting up there. And a guy that was kind of a mentor to me, William Domhoff, is, if he's still around, he's in his 90s. So I'm curious, who do you look up to that is still got a long life ahead of him, that's research you really follow, that they're carrying the torch and you know, it's very serious dream work? And then a final one is maybe related. Do you believe in any specific evolutionary reason for dreaming?
Oh, that's a good question. I talk to Bob Stickgold like every other day. And it's true that Bob is old. He's like fully there. But yeah, I talk to Bob a lot. In terms of sort of whose papers I'm just totally excited to read when they come out. Whenever Karen Konkoly or Michelle Carr or Claudia Picard-Deland are doing anything, or Remy Mallet, I'm reading all those because they're the first folks who got me excited about incubating and engineering dreams. And then a little bit of an older guard, but whatever Isabel Arnulf is writing about parasomnias and sleepwalking, I find so fascinating. What I think basically everything that Jennifer Wint writes is awesome. And I really like Siddhartha Hibeiro's work as well. I'm really curious about the kind of hallucinogen and dream crossover work that they're doing. I think Thomas Andrion on kind of continued cognitive processing throughout the sleep cycle is going to be so important if we get into learning work. I think Ken Paller stuff on targeted forgetting and targeted memory reactivation found really fascinating. Yeah, and then I don't know, like I'm watching a lot of tech folks as well. So right now I'm really excited about what Guillermo Bernal is doing with his fascia device. I don't know if you've come across this, but it's like basically, yeah, okay, it's sleep mask, wireless. Gonna give you all the signals you need to stage sleep. Has a bunch of AI on the back end doing sleep staging for you live, sort of like a Hypnodyne Zmax souped up without any of the sticky stuff. And yeah, who else am I reading? I don't know. There's a bunch of people. People are cranking it out. There's like 3 Kerr bio papers that just came out in the last week around emotion, REM, dreams, and one of them was about playing audio to folks in their dreams. And he's got a Greek sounding last name, and I don't remember it, but I might. But I was excited about that. Yeah, many. Oh, do I think there's an evolutionary purpose to dreaming? I am partial to, since I talked to Bob a lot, the sort of next up theory. This idea that dreams are in the kind of sorry, I'm saying a lot of names, but in the like Antonio Damasio, the feeling of what happens, this idea that we solve a lot of our supposedly rational challenges using our emotions, that dreams are this kind of limitless space to experiment with possibilities. And then when those possibilities happen in an experiential realm, we feel how they make us feel, and that helps us make choices, and that helps us create the kind of conscious, unconscious associations and emotions that guide our waking decision making. I like the next step stuff. I'm not really convinced by any of the threat simulation stuff. I'm definitely not convinced by the like our brain's a computer and dreams are a kind of like model training stuff, which I think has gotten some traction. I should probably learn more about it from, I think, mostly from Eric Howell at Tufts. But yeah, I'm a fan of the next up stuff because it's also just how my dreams feel to me, which seems like a really important way to test a scientific theory, is whether it feels right.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
All right, nice. Let's dip back into the chat. But Link, you don't have a question, do you? I saw you raised your hands. But yeah, let's go to the chat. Oh, you're good? Okay. Yeah, I see Chuck. You got a question in the chat. You're the next one that I'm seeing. Do you wanna just ask that?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, great. Hi, Adam. Thank you for your time today.
Sure.
I'm hoping to just pick your brain about some more concrete things around the using the audio cues to do incubation, to do induction. I have been working on a personal project that uses a Fitbit and an Android app, and I was looking to sort of build something that I couldn't find because I was getting interested in lucid dreaming, and I'm at the point I've spent enough time on it that I've gotten most of the nuts and bolts parts working. I'm finding my interest in lucid dreaming is sort of waning, and my interest in just sort of sleep quality and dream quality and playing around with the tech in general is more engaging. So I'm just at the point now where I'm starting to be able to deliver cues at the right times or good times at sleep onset during potential REM periods. And so now I'm getting the cues and I'm playing around with it. So I'm just now really being able to experiment, and I seem to have 2 states, awake and asleep. I'm aware of the cues, or I'm not aware of them at all. I've had maybe one experience where I could sort of become aware. I was aware in some way in the dreams. It's seeped into the dream, right? And I'm doing audio and I'm doing vibration. So that's the kind of thing I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit more about, particularly audio cues and the approach there that you've found successful.
Yeah, totally. I think that the people in our lab have done this in two ways. One of them is cueing people while they are awake but drowsy, and hoping that they can, in a kind of mindfulnessy way, keep that thing in mind as they slip into sleep. And this is kind of like a wake back to bed, lucid dreaming protocol approach to things, but approach to incubation. I have been doing something different, which is letting people slip beyond that moment to what I would call a semi-lucidity, or that's a confusing word to use in this context, a semi-consciousness. And in that in-between period, play volume at a level where they're going to hear it, but it's not going to wake them up. And then later, give them between 1 and 5 minutes, depending on the kind of depth of N1 experience they want to have, or that I'm curious about them having, and then waking them up, but asking them when they wake up to stay totally still, to keep their eyes closed, and to just report for 30 seconds, so that then we can let them fall back asleep. And what they come up to, if you give it to a couple sleep scientists just on the EEG, even when you're asking them for a dream report, they would not say this is full wakefulness. They would say, oh, I'm looking at the alpha theta ratios, it's not full wakefulness. And they would say, like, even it looks sort of sleep spindly sometimes right after somebody finishes reporting. Drowsiness is funny. Drowsiness is mixed. And so my kind of first suggestion to you is, it sounds like a sort of silly one, but is getting the volume right, so you're not waking people up too much when you're playing cues. My second suggestion is to do it a bunch of times in a row in a single session. The reason is it'll get weirder as you keep going. It'll get more REM-like. So if you do serial cueing, and each of those cues maybe wakes you up a little bit, you're going to get more used to it, just like you would get more used to a bird song in the morning. And that means you're going to wake up less with each successive cue. But also, each successive awakening is going to look physiologically and phenomenologically more like REM, as sleep pressure increases across those awakenings. So they're going to get weirder, they're going to get dreamier. So I think one of the ways, if you have this, if your kind of complaint is, oh, I'm either awake or I'm asleep, I'm either experiencing it or not experiencing it, it sounds to me like you want to create some kind of in-between areas. And I think the best way to create those in-between areas is with serial awakenings. And that's both because of that increasing REM-like physiology and because of your kind of accommodation to the cueing and the reduced awakenings you get from that.
Great. Just a quick follow-up question. That does sort of line up with where I was thinking things would have to go. And do you find increasing volume in those successive, like fairly close on, or decreasing volume, or
Nope.
maintaining the same flat?
Yep, maintaining the
Yeah.
same. I mean, I think basically you're looking for novelty when you're asleep. So there's this series of
Mhm.
papers on this unihemispheric sleep in humans, right? The vigilance network staying on in one hemisphere of people's brains so they could listen through the other ear to a sleep environment, especially in an unfamiliar one. And oh, there goes my phone on low battery. So I think what you're trying to do is not create something unfamiliar and not create that kind of funky, like I'm sleeping in a creepy motel space for me. But then I think maybe that would be really useful to have kind of unpredictable cues as well, because the sleeping in a creepy motel sleep where you're like a little vigilant tends to be a sleep where you're dreaming about the place that you're in, like
Right.
constantly. I'm having these, they're not sleep paralysis, but they're kind of like it. Somebody's coming in the room. I see the door. It is the door that I went to sleep in. So like, also, in the same way that the sleep lab is an amazing place to incubate dreams at the sleep lab, creepy motels. Anyways, so I tend to try to make the cues familiar, but I think you could go either way. I gotta go in 3 minutes, y'all, just because I'm meeting I said to my mom I have an hour, and gotta meet her.
Well, thank you, Adam.
Oh yeah, thanks for the question.
Nice.
I'll pop one.
And, yeah, so let's see if there's any other like kind of final questions out there. I see
I have a question.
your hands raised. Okay, great.
Well, first of all, thanks. I guess you have to go soon. I mean, there's so many questions. I do appreciate that you also care about the ethics of it. Since you don't have that much time, just wondering, like, you said you're more interested in dream incubation. So what exactly helps you for your nightmares? What helps you like for lucid dreaming, actually? What kind of strategies? And just also like more macro is like, how can we align the world towards more open source and like, sort of like where it's governed by a global protocol and not like, corporations trying to control people's dreams, like you mentioned before. So any thoughts you have? And then also maybe like, do you have like a list of all the readings, of all the resources, anything you can share maybe for the community, like, any strategies you have for lucid dreaming? So I'm trying to ask questions just like, that benefit for everybody. And then I guess what's your dream, and like, what's your dream of like, of the dream world, and like, what do you want to sort of achieve? And like, you already said that distinguishing in terms of like, working on like incubation, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. So, anything you want to touch on in like in those few minutes. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. In my last minute, I will try to, so, Salix, who is still on this call? Yes. Salix has a better list of dream sources than just about anyone I've encountered. So I don't know if they want to share it with folks, but that is a great list. I if you're curious what I'm reading, I put it on the FAQ section on our site on MIT. And I put a bunch of scientists I like and papers I like there. And then to the lucid dreaming question, I don't do any lucid dreaming on purpose. It happens a lot accidentally in hypnagogy for me. Right. To the nightmare question, I think the most important thing I've done for my nightmares, which have gone away, is increasing my locus of control, increasing my self-efficacy, my belief that dreams are a space that I can change. And that meaning that you make that anxiety at sleep onset, fear of sleep onset disappear. And so also the studies that we're doing are focused on increasing self-efficacy for dreaming. And then to the ethics question, how to stop corporations. Right now, what I've done is basically slowed down development of the science working on, which is not a great response. And I am talking, Dustin wrote that article after talking to me, and the folks who went to talk up at the FTC, it was the same. I'm sort of in these conversations constantly, but I think basically the work that Brian is doing is the work that has to be done, which is gathering community, lots of people who have lots of different perspectives, some who know about policy, some who have a sense of how the money works and the advertising world works, some who have a sense of how hardware works and whatever, getting them together and getting them to care. And so I think this kind of community gathering work is genuinely where it happens. I got to run, Mom. Thank you all.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for joining our community tonight. Everything was great. Very generous.
Thanks for hosting, Ryan.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks again.
I'm around for questions. Shoot me emails. Adios, y'all.
Thanks.